Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Gameweek 22 transfer plans. It's really just to look at, first of all, the update from the Gameweek 21 transfer plans and how things have changed. So we'll talk about my team very briefly. We'll also talk about why some of my strategies have changed and also the impact of the double landing on double Gameweek 24 and what I think about the assistant managership being played around then, plus the idea of how we're supposed to plan around Blind Gaming 29 progressively now that we have those Carabao Cup first legs out of the way, and how that's going to change my mind on certain things. So starting with my team, as per usual, we are looking at a team that has done okay for this game week. We have 5 players who've played. One of them, well, technically my captain has played twice, right? So 5 players have played, and then we've got 7 to go, if you want to put it like that. And I'm clearly on a slight red now, nothing substantial. And that's because I've put Chris Wood on my bench, which I don't really regret, right? Other than, of course, he scored a goal and he's made me look silly again. But that happens from time to time. I think especially when I own someone like Trent, I'm hoping to sort of maximize certain outcomes. I probably was a little bit more hedged towards Liverpool getting a good result, and they didn't necessarily. They got a draw. Chris Wood had one chance. He took that one chance beautifully with his weak foot, and he converted that and sunk me early within the evening. Whereas the Palmer captaincy went really well. So these kind of things go back and forth. The decision to not play Wood, I think I'm fine with. Obviously, when we look at models, when we look at odds, ultimately we don't expect so much from Nottingham Forest versus Liverpool, who have been, yes, whilst conceding their clean sheets recently, still actually not conceded a huge amount of chances outside of, I'd say, the United game, where that looked pretty awful. And I'm totally fine with the decision. As far as Rodgers, he's still yet to play. I don't know if Rodgers is going to do any good, but it was really between Rodgers and Wood. I benched João Pedro in the end because if you look at, let's say, João Pedro's season history, we have Hurstler showing some signs, I think, and tendencies to sort of manage players. So a good example is he got injured, I think, for one of the international breaks here, and missed the Ipswich game, and then came back and only played a cameo appearance before he got injured by Morgan Gibbs-White within this Nottingham Forest match. And so there's instances where even within, let's say, a short time frame injury, which is clearly this injury with João Pedro, we see Fabian have this tendency to, I think, manage players. When you look at, for example, substitute, like center backs rather, Dunk has come back from injuries and he's played maybe 10-15 minutes before starting the next match. Whereas you see a different manager like Marco Silva, he'll, let's say, bench Anderson and then suddenly he's just starting him for consecutive games because of different approaches. And I think with Eddie Howe, another similar reason why I played Isak ultimately is either I tend to think Howe is someone who will just play Isak to start him or just won't risk him at all. And in this case, I felt that was a pretty high chance that João Pedro could cameo because of the turnaround impact of this game versus Man United on the weekend, where arguably it's more important for this Brighton team to be prepared for that or to have a stronger team for that. You know, no disrespect to Ipswich. So those were kind of my thoughts, and that's why I benched João Pedro, also why I benched Wood, and I was always benching Wood anyway, so no real regrets there. My bench order was always going to be like this, with the exception that I've just changed João Pedro around. If someone can get ill over the course of the next 2 days and somehow I get Wood, then fine. That would very, very much be welcomed. But I think the most interesting decision that I made with my team is that I did sit on the Palmer captaincy in the end. Part of this is because the market odds were really good for Palmer to have a goal. We also saw indications that Bournemouth were a little bit weaker in their side with a couple illnesses, etc. So I felt quite confident in the Palmer captaincy. And ultimately, a lot of the players within my team did play within the FA Cup, trying to sort of chase their wins or actually get their wins, right? Bruno playing extra time, Odegaard playing extra time, not that he was a captaincy option. Isak, unfortunately, just being precluded from his game. Palmer getting rest, which is significant, but not being injured like Isak. And we don't know. Isak might play 90 minutes and Howe might have just completely lied, but I'm going to take him for face value sometimes and just expect that. That's why I pretty much didn't go for the Isak vice captaincy. Bruno ended up joining my team. I actually sold Mbumo. So that means that if we look at, for example, the transfer list kind of piece here, I did decide to sell Mbumo, and that kind of meant that I lost 0.4 in terms of team value in the bank to make this move. And part of this is because when I kind of looked at my general fixture and chip strategy for now, it didn't seem like I actually needed to have a lot of money disposable within the future to make moves heading towards my next wild card. And I can very much see that on my next wild card, it's very plausible that I don't go for Mbumo. And part of this is because I'm now looking towards a game week 30/31 wildcard strategy. I think if you guys are interested in terms of chip strategy, I'll probably make a video around game week 23 where there's a little bit more time for me to do this because unfortunately the turnaround is just too tight. And we constantly keep getting information on fixtures, which changes some of the videos that I've been planning, unfortunately, right? Like the double gaming 24 announcement, like some of the cup game impacts and stuff like that. But if you look at Mbumo here, crucially, his fixtures between 30 plus are just really poor. So it's really hard to conceive of the idea that I would be going for Mbumo really outside of game week 29, right? Because most teams are going to dead end into 29 and then wildcard 30 or 31. And if you own Mbumo here, it already feels like a little bit of a reluctant own, but you would be most likely enjoying the great run of games 24 plus. Whereas if you were wildcarding, you're probably likely to dispense of Mbumo anyways, because you don't really want to have Newcastle away, or even if you start with a wildcard 31, Chelsea, Arsenal, Brighton, Nottingham Forest back to back, and even United arguably is a slightly tougher game, right? Even though it's a nice home matchup, all things considered. And then he closes the season out really well, but you might just use a transfer in to bring him in later. But you can't be always just factoring money in the bank within the team. This is not a game where we're playing for pure economics. I'm also here to try gain points. And yes, I've kept Odegaard because I'm actually pretty confident that he's on penalties now after all things said and done, after the penalty miss, after Havertz's penalty miss, after Trossard didn't even take a penalty. I think realistically, the only player who can challenge for penalties now is Rice, because Jesus is also with an ACL injury. And so I feel pretty confident that Odegaard's a penalty taker of the team. You know, is he any interesting in open play? Not necessarily, but he still has some value with a lot of the set pieces that he has with Nwaneri being out. And the plan really is to own Odegaard up until game week 24. And I'll talk about that in my transfer plan. So that was kind of the plan where if I just compared, let's say, Odegaard's next 3 games, which is Spurs at home, Aston Villa at home versus Wolves away, including Wolves away, versus Mbumo's games, which was City at home and then Liverpool at home and then Crystal Palace away. That's kind of the ultimate decision as to why I went for keeping Odegaard within my team. And I feel quite comfortable having done that, because planning ahead over the course of the week, and as we got a little bit more understanding of the fixture landscape and things like that, I didn't really see the need or that I would be hurt so much by going for one, Bruno, who is probably going to rise, and two, secondly, selling Mbumo and keeping the idea that I'm going to bring him back into my team very quickly instead through Odegaard instead. So that's kind of the point. And so that's really the team as it stands. If I was just to discuss on some of the players, I think Wood has been absolutely exceptional, right? There's no disputing that. He's just been great again. But I mean, there's obviously runs of games where, you know, he can still blank, and this is still possible for a player playing this well and finishing this well. And I still think when I look at Wood in the future, after Southampton at home, the fixtures are really poor. Bournemouth away, Brighton at home is a really nice game, I'd say, but even Fulham away, Newcastle away, Arsenal are pretty bad games. Man City at home, I mean, there's no denying it. It's a great game, and that's probably where I'll reinvest into someone like Wood at that point in time. But there's no need to say that I will be owning Wood for any game really after, I would say, 23. So that's kind of where my thoughts are with Wood right now. And I'm sure it comes off as very strange because it looks like I'm selling one of the best players in the game. But I think it's quite similar to the decision to sell Cunha a few weeks back without even necessarily knowing what the impacts of that suspension would be. Because I sold Cunha to Wood knowing that he was either going to be suspended soon or later, and he ended up just being suspended for 2 games, but I was happy going to Wood. And very similarly, I think after Wood versus Southampton at home, I don't have a deep need to keep him in my team persistently. With Flecken, he unfortunately just has another awful game of football. Hopefully he can continue to rack up some saves and give me 3 points. That's all I really want from Flecken, really. That's all I want. And then I can transfer him out a little bit later. So that's kind of the team as it stands. Let's quickly jump into my transfer plans. So as always, I use the Fantasy Football Hub My Team pick and rating tool. It's something that I find just very simple in terms of just seeing how clean it is to look at, you know, expected points, first of all, over a couple of game weeks, the game week rating percentage, and just general suggested transfers where I want to make transfers myself, and sort of reconciling that with let's say, what an AI would suggest. On top of that, it's just a really clean planner where I can use a bunch of other tools in conjunction with it. So you can kind of set plans, put chip strategies into place. Have a look at the link in description if you're interested. I believe there's still a great sort of free trial offer for this month. So have a look at it. If you're interested, have a look at all the tools that can help you climb rank and just gain a better understanding of how to navigate the fixture landscape, particularly since we have doubles and things like that coming on. We also have Ben's calendar as well within Fantasy Football Hub. So lots to look at. Have a look at the link in bio below. Now, starting with Game Week 22, the team is in a very strong position, and that's simply because, when I was looking at my team, Odegaard still actually has two good games, in my opinion. Arguably, Man City at home is actually a really good game as well, but I do think that Tottenham at home is even better for Mbumo. So on Game Week 24, I think that's quite an easy move for me to move out of Odegaard from, if I wish to do that. And who knows, I might still want to keep Odegaard for Man City at home just because it's Man City at home. But that's kind of the landscape. João Pedro is probably the biggest burning question within our teams, because I don't know whether he's going to play on Thursday or not. It's probably likely that he, I don't know, maybe cameos on Thursday, maybe he plays limited minutes and suddenly he actually looks like he's fit and ready to start for the weekend. I'm going to trust that Fabian says that he's been in training, but maybe he gets managed, I don't know how, and that he's still available to start on the weekend. Now, I will discuss João Pedro being fit for the Game Week 22. I will also discuss João Pedro not being fit for 22, but taking the assumption that he's going to be fit for Game Week 23. That's kind of what I'm thinking about, right? Because Game Week 23 is a ways away still, and I'm hoping that he'll be fine for then. So I don't really think there's a need to discuss almost if João Pedro becomes a sell. So I'm not going to take that assumption in this transfer video. If he gets injured, then look, our plans have to change, and that's life in FPL as usual. But I'm going to take Fabian at face value here and hope that João Pedro seems fit going forwards, right? 22, 23 plus, around that time. On Game Week 22, what's interesting, I think, first of all, is actually this is a very interesting week to go Palmer captaincy again. So I went Palmer captain pretty confidently. Brentford clearly are not the same level of defense as Nottingham Forest. And I also will add that Liverpool actually had plenty of chances, including Salah himself, within that game. But Palmer also just has a much, much better game. So instead of playing a much more competent team like Bournemouth at home, you're now playing Wolves at home, who, other than I think a nice little new manager buff, which included playing 10 versus 11 versus Man United, they've looked pretty poor still in defense. And so I'd probably take my chances with Palmer again. I'm sure a lot of people will find it convenient to switch back to Salah captaincy, but you never know. These things change very quickly in terms of how short-term some people's opinions are. Clearly, Salah is still the better player going forwards, and I'm very scared about that double where I won't be able to triple captain him, but that's that. First of all, on 24, I think I'd like to say that I have no interest in using the assistant managership on 24, because if we look at 24, it's really good for Everton, I would say, the two sets of games, because you've got Leicester at home, and then you actually have this sort of table bonus opportunity versus Liverpool, where you're at least playing at home. And yes, even though you're playing probably the best team in the league, or let's be honest, you are playing the best team in the league, the chances I think a lot of people would view are slim in terms of being able to get that table bonus. But I think the probability is still there. And then you're also supported by just a really good game. Whereas with Slot, I think you're actually kind of shooting yourself at the foot a little bit, because the ceiling, I would say, of those games for Liverpool do feel low. Yes, of course, Liverpool have pulled out performances versus really good teams where, let's say, they go away versus Spurs and they absolutely smash them. They have taken most of their opportunities this season outside of the Nottingham Forest game. So I can completely understand why someone would like to bank in the consistent Liverpool and then just sort of view that ultimately having a slot double is the kind of ace in the hole. To me, though, I don't really see that as the case. I still would like to have a double opportunity where at least you've got one chance of really nice table bonus, or at least if you're a team that is as competent and as good as Liverpool, you have the chance to absolutely smash your opponents. And I really don't think that Everton away or Bournemouth away really present those opportunities. So I don't really like a Game Week 24 assistant manager. However, we have heard news that there was a very small possibility that that Fulham versus Tottenham game that could be a prospective Game Week 29 blank could suddenly become a double game week fixture on Game Week 25. The reason being, if Spurs were suddenly to achieve top 8 within their group stage run within Europe, and also to actually move towards the finals of the Carabao Cup, we might find out after, unfortunately, the Game Week 24 deadline that they could schedule in a double Game Week 25. But that's the issue, right? You can't almost plan a double Game Week 24 on the assumption that Spurs are going to do a lot of winning. And that's not an insult to Spurs. I'm just talking about the probabilities, right? Actually, right now, if you look at betting odds, they're only 65% chance to actually they're 35% chance to go through within the Carabao Cup, and that's even though they have an advantage, right, heading towards Anfield. So it just shows you the strength of Liverpool and how we view them and how important that game at Anfield is. And then on top of that, you also have a pretty slim chance at them securing top 8, because unfortunately not all the results within Europe have gone their way. Plus, we also have to take into account that the Premier League would be very proactive about their future results after that to be able to kind of force that double game in 25. And I just don't see that being possible. And I don't really want to use the chip on Moyes, unfortunately. I'd still like to take my chances with around game week 30, 31, that sort of territory of 3 games, or 36 until the end of the season. where you kind of play on that on the beach income or impact. So starting with Gameweek 22, I'm looking at Flecken here where he clearly just has another bad game. What can you do but hope for more saves from Flecken, which he has been producing so far. I would probably play Hall once again. I think I discussed this last week, but I think Hall's quite an easy play. But Munoz also feels quite an easy play too. It's just a case of, who's going to play for my team. I think, if I'm honest, Rodgers is going to sit at the absolute back of my bench. Arsenal away is just one of the worst fixtures in town, and I have no interest in that. And you know what? If Rodgers scores versus my defense, just like Chris Wood scored versus my defense this week, then so be it. I still think that attacking defenders are very good. I think clean sheet odds are very high for a lot of these players, and I'll take my chances. With João Pedro's out though, if he's just out for this fixture, and let's say we expect him to come back on 23, 24, I don't think I'll touch João Pedro. He'll stay in my team. It'll probably just be a decision where I either play Munoz or I either play Castagna, and who knows. I right now am inclined to actually play Munoz because I don't think I was altogether that impressed by the performance of West Ham, even though they scored 3 goals versus Fulham. I think that actually came down to a lot of defensive mistakes from Fulham, as opposed to West Ham looked like a world beater team. And we know that they have unfortunately been dealt a pretty poor hand with injuries when it comes to Bowen, Fulkrug, and even Somerville, which should be still applicable for Gaming 23. So if João Pedro's out, then, this is probably what I do. Castagna probably first bench for me. I can't really legislate for, I don't know, if João Pedro's fit or not, so I'm just going to take the assumption there. This is probably going to be the team I probably roll. Yes, I've got 0.4 in the bank, but I can't really see any moves that I would make that I think are immediately better. The reason why I've kind of ignored teams for now, or players like, let's say, an Eze or a Gordon, is the more transfers I make towards players who have a high chance of blanking on Game Week 29, which right now seems to be anyone involved in that Newcastle Palace game, and we're a little bit 50-50 uncertain about what's going to happen between Tottenham and Liverpool, right? Which also kind of takes away the want for me to go to Solanke, which was my previous plans before. So right now, I'm a little bit cold on Solanke. I don't really want to be investing too much into Liverpool players unless I can find a way to navigate with blank Game Week 29. And that pretty much means that I'm signaling a move towards Alisson Becker. The reason why is if I go for Alisson Becker and Flecken, yes, of course, that's a lot of money used within the goalkeeping position. But we know that in a Saka-less world, that actually not too much money is really needed to create a really good, I think, high-performing FPL team. And I also have a lot of transfer value, right? And it's okay to use it in this sort of way, in my opinion, so that I can manipulate the double for Liverpool, but then also manipulate my ability or not create further problems when it comes to using free transfers to get a goalkeeper for Game Week 29 if I have someone like Flecken who's going to play on 29 anyways. So that's kind of my thoughts and feelings. So if I go towards Game Week 23, the team looks a lot better here. I'm not sure why Hall suddenly has a Brighton kit. That's interesting, but I mean, Hall is also such a simple, easy play, but then Rodgers just has a great game. So there will be a bench dilemma here. I think if I'm being completely honest, I will bench Wood again, for better or for worse, probably for worse, but I'll take my chances and play the fixtures, quote unquote, and I'll play Rodgers here. So that's kind of the plan. So if I go quickly to Game Week 23, I play Rodgers over Wood. This is probably a week where you're Salah capping. So if I just optimize my team, but then just switch things around, I'll probably still play Odegaard over Wood. Yes, I'm sure someone will get upset in the chat, but Hall is also someone that I could easily play. But unfortunately, I think he becomes first bench or I bench Munoz in this game, which I think is possible, right? I either play Hall or Munoz. We knew that I created these little benching dilemmas for myself. But as I always say, I don't really care if I've got points in the bench, as long as my team is also producing points on the team. And as long as we can do that and achieve that, then I'm fine. So this is kind of the team roughly. And if João Pedro's out, even more beautiful, because then I can just suddenly play Wood. And then the only dilemma goes back to being Hall versus Munoz. And so that's kind of how I plan to play this team here. So suddenly I arrive towards Game Week 24 with 2 additional free transfers. So here we have 3 free transfers, right? So because we roll on 22, we roll on 23, we suddenly arrive at 24 with 3 free transfers, and it's the double. Do I have an opportunity to get towards too many Everton players? Admittedly, I would say no. So if I optimize the team, I mean, Wood has a good game, but I can kind of see myself going NDI. The reason being, if I go for NDI, I get at least a forward from this Everton team that is hopefully going to play the full 2 matches. What we've seen from Dominic Calvert-Lewin so far is absolutely nothing, and he's actually been rotated out a lot. But under maybe Moyes, who has actually talked very massively about Dominic Calvert-Lewin, who knows? We might even be back for the pain train that is Dominic Calvert-Lewin for basically like a 1 game week only type of event. What is nice about this run of games for Rodgers, generally speaking, like 23 plus, is Rodgers is someone that I can see myself playing every single week, right? West Ham at home, Wolves away, Ipswich at home, Chelsea at home. And then it gets a little bit worse around Game Week 27. So we can reconsider other options around this point in time. So those are kind of my thoughts right now. If I make transfers, I think I do NDI, and then I suddenly go Valdemarson out into Ali Becker. So this gives me a pretty strong team. I'd like to also go out of Odegaard as well. And this gives me the opportunity to bench either one of João Pedro or Rodgers, which I'm still comfortable with. And this is really just to get Mbeumo on my team. There's clearly going to be an opportunity here where a lot of us might be considering someone like McNeil. And if he's fit and if he's ready to play, then maybe I'll go for it. But if McNeil is still, a little bit murky, maybe his minutes aren't totally secure under Moyes, then there's no reason for me to touch McNeil, and I probably ignore him altogether. Instead, I actually would like to jump onto Mbeumo versus Tottenham at home, which I think just is the start of a really good run of games for Mbeumo. Why am I suddenly so comfortable making so many free transfers for players? Well, what I would say is that a lot of the free transfers for players here on this game week aren't going to impact my team for blank Game Week 29. So when I talked about my wish to sort of dead end the team around then, I still think that my team is going to be pretty well set up, because the only players right now, when I look at this team after making all these transfers on Game Week 24, that will probably prospectively blank in Game Week 29, taking the assumption that Isak and Co and Newcastle will be able to secure that lead that they brought into the Carabao Cup second leg in the semi-finals at St. James Park, would be meaning that Isak would be out, Hall would be out, Munoz would be out, so 3 players, and then we will see what happens with Tottenham versus Newcastle round 2, because Tottenham versus Liverpool round 2, because either Salah and Trent are out, and that's two other players, or suddenly the Fulham game becomes a blank, and Castagna is the only player on my team who won't be able to be available. So worst case scenario, 2 Liverpool players are out of my team. I don't really count Alisson Becker, because if I go for Flecken and Becker as a combination of goalkeepers, then all I'm really doing to myself is leaving myself with someone who's going to play in Game Week 29 for me in Flecken, worst case scenario, and I don't need to make a keeper transfer in the future. So it's 2 outfield players there, and then 3 outfield players within the Newcastle Palace game. So that's 5 free transfers. And if I work my way towards Game Week 29, that's more than enough still going towards Game Week 29, where I'll have the free transfers left for players, to take Isak out of my team potentially and lose a little bit of transfer value, to take Salah out of my team potentially to lose transfer value, and still be in an okay position from a planning point of view. I guess the question around then is, maybe when we arrive at 24 plus and that sort of general timeline, how important or how significant is Money in the Bank when we look at a prospective Game Week 30 wildcard? I wouldn't be able to give you the answers now, because so much of it is going to be depending on future FA Cup outcomes, and I'll talk about that in a future transfer or ship strategy video around Game Week 23, where I'll kind of hash out what are the decision-making junctures for a lot of us within FPL. But I kind of like this idea of wildcarding towards 30, 31, and that's why I'm comfortable making these moves. And so if I go towards Mbeumo, I enjoy basically a great run of games, and he does a blank in Game Week 29, hence why I'm willing to sell Odegaard. Yes, I'm a little bit light on the Everton players. I only have Ndiaye, but, so be it. I don't really mind missing out on whatever that generational Pickford double clean sheet is going to be. If we see a reiteration of that, maybe even, missing out on Mikalenko, it is what it is. I don't really mind. I prefer probably having Mbeumo over Odegaard at this juncture, and that's kind of why I forced the decision. I kind of felt like I could maybe benefit, hopefully, from Odegaard versus Bruno, or Odegaard versus Mbeumo over the next 3 game weeks, heading towards 24, and suddenly I just reversed the decision, and I kind of managed my team going forwards. And suddenly on 25, then I don't really care about the double anymore, but I do actually have still a really strong goalkeeper, and I have really good fixtures within my team, like so. And it's around Game Week 25 or 26 where I probably need to be thinking about things like, do I go Rodgers to Semenyo? Because, and actually, sorry, I did miss this out, but obviously if Liverpool are to beat Spurs in the next iteration of the Carabao Cup game, then Aston Villa will also blank, because Liverpool play Aston Villa in Game Week 29 prospectively. So yeah, if Rodgers is suddenly confirmed to basically blank in Game Week 29, then maybe after 25, after Ipswich at home, this is a pretty nice opportunity for me to actually just simply jump off of Rodgers into Semenyo in Game Week 26. And I think that's pretty much how I'm going to manage my team, because why not give him Ipswich at home? And then suddenly I move into Semenyo, a really great pick. Dango Ouattara is also someone who's really interesting me, because he's playing center forward right now for Bournemouth, and he has done for the last 2 games. He also played 90 minutes versus Chelsea, and he played and got a brace within the previous match in the FA Cup. So it just seems like that he's the default option for now. We haven't really seen that Bournemouth have been heavily linked with another centre forward, and maybe that's because they've spent a fair bit of money as well, sort of reinvesting, I guess, the Dominic Solanke funds, and maybe they don't have plans necessarily to sign another player. And the benefit of the recent Tete news is that it seems like actually Tete is going to be out until end of March and early April, which is a huge timeline that allows me to keep Castagna at 4.2, a Fulham defender, I think, at a really good price point. NDI, as you can see here, is someone that I'm just not going to be playing very often after 24. And that's because this comes down to, do I have the faith that João Pedro is suddenly going to be playing a lot of games? And do I have faith in this general team structure? I think yes. Moving Rodgers to Semenyo around here, Semenyo suddenly has really good playable games after 24, right? 25 is basically the start of his good run of games. I'd say Brighton away is a little bit subpar, but he now seems like a pick that you don't really mind consistently playing week on week, which I suppose even applies to someone like Chris Wood, right? Going back to it. But the difference is Semenyo is 5.6 and someone like Chris Wood is 6.8 or 6.9 reaching, probably going to be 7.0 by the end of this week. And so he's going to be quite expensive. And when we're starting to move funds in different places, am I more happy going for someone like Semenyo and having a structure like this, as long as João Pedro is fit and available to play? Probably that is the case. The only trap, I suppose, that I could be putting myself into is, spending so much money on the goalkeepers. If it is the case that, let's say, João Pedro continues to be quite injury prone, which he is, then I'm maybe not creating enough security within my team to sort of manage this João Pedro situation. The alternative, I suppose, is I don't make that Mbeumo transfer in Game Week 24, because maybe I have an understanding that João Pedro is not really fit, not really available around this time, and instead of going for Mbeumo, maybe I just go straight to someone like Semenyo instead, and I create a little bit more of a robust team where I spend a little bit more money within the forward positions. Once again, I would say I don't think Wood necessarily is going to be the forward of choice for me around this time, because from, let's say, 24 plus, the fixtures are a little bit poor for Wood, and then they start to get better closer towards the blank game week 29 period. So that's maybe where I can reconsider going for Wood. But for now, heading towards my transfer plans for Game Week 26, no real plans to do that. And that's why I think it's quite important to see whether you really need that many doublers. Like I plan probably at best to get one or two Everton. I would still rather maybe use a single free transfer towards someone like Mbeumo in Game Week 24. And it might not be the case, right? Maybe I still choose to keep Odegaard, because Man City at home, as I said, is a really good game. And suddenly if I want another Everton doubler, I'm sure I can afford doing that, because by just taking a Hall or a Munoz out of my team on Game Week 24, I get rid of someone who's potentially blanking in Game Week 29, and I have another doubler in my team, and I create a stronger team for Game Week 24 without having to make that sort of Mbeumo out move. So a lot of these kind of things are within the balance. I think another thing to consider is whether players are actually nailed under Moyes, and whether things have changed under him, and whether there are better Everton players to go for. Because for now, it seems like a lot of Everton fans are very anti-Mykolenko. I can't necessarily say that Moyes is of the same camp. And so we just need to monitor that as we go forwards, which is also why when I look at, let's say, Luis Diaz, Jota, Gakpo, a lot of players sort of that people have been interested into recently, it's been really hard trying to pick where the points are going to come from, because they all rotate quite a bit. Liverpool don't have absolutely perfect fixtures game to game. And that someone like Luis Diaz or Gakpo could be the player who is coming off the bench, or could be the player who's playing 55, 65 minutes a game. And as long as Darwin is still somewhat available over the rest of this period, or they actually bring in another attacker, that's going to create further issues for the team. And or if, let's say, if Chiesa is remotely fit and starts to build on his fitness, which is honestly unlikely. But those are my thoughts right now in terms of my transfer plans. I hope that kind of clears things out. As I said, my general strategy right now is to go for a wildcard 30-31. The reason for that is I think really well outlined actually by Ben Crellin. So if you just quickly give him a follow on Twitter or Blue Sky, I'm sure he's already made a post about what he considers to be his meta strategy. I'm pretty much in line with those thoughts there. And of course, I mean, he's much more forward thinking in terms of fixtures than myself. And I would be remiss probably to not go on a similar strategy of Ben's choice, especially after how last season's very unique quote unquote fixture strategy did not work out so well for me. So yeah, those are my thoughts, especially since the fixture landscape is a little bit easier to navigate this year. And we do have a finite amount of chips. We do have more chips, but we also have, less, I think, uncertainty compared to last season. And so that's quite welcomed, and we'll just continue to navigate FPL as we go along. What I will say is, though, transfers are important right now. And so anytime you're using transfers towards people who could prospectively blank, that could hurt your team. If you're using transfers to players who are not going to blank, then I don't actually think that you need to worry so much in FPL.